Her husband, the CEO, told her, "You're sleeping in the guest room until you say sorry." She just nodded and said, "Okay." The next morning he walked in and asked, "Have you learned your lesson?" But when he saw her side of the closet empty and the divorce papers on the table, he finally understood who was really in charge. A very powerful story for my beautiful family. Watch till the end for a great lesson for my powerful sisters and daughters. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. May the Almighty cover your life with endless light, fill your hearts with unwavering peace, and bless your homes with joy that never fades. May every woman be adorned with strength and grace, every man guided by wisdom and compassion, and every child wrapped in love that feels like heaven itself. I pray that your tears transform into hope, your struggles into triumphs, and your nights into gentle rest. May every breath you take remind you of your worth, every step be guided by faith, and every moment be touched by God's infinite love. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." Some women are born to shine. Ruby Tyson was born to lift others into the light, even when it meant standing in the shadows. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and yesterday's grease, but Ruby barely noticed anymore. Her feet throbbed inside shoes held together with superglue. Her lower back screamed from carrying trays since dawn, but she smiled at every customer like they were royalty. This was her second shift. The warehouse job started at midnight. "Ruby, order up!" DeMarco shouted from the kitchen. She grabbed the plates, delivered them to college students who didn't bother looking up from their phones. No tip again. She cleared the table anyway, her mind calculating which bill could wait another week. The apartment she shared with David sat on the edge of a neighborhood where sirens sang lullabies. She'd found it after his scholarship money ran out, after his parents stopped answering his calls. But Ruby saw something different. She saw the man who stayed up reading philosophy books by candlelight when the electricity got cut off. She saw the brilliant mind that could solve problems others couldn't understand. She saw their future if she could just hold on long enough. "You're gonna collapse one day," Marco said, leaning against the counter as the last customers left. "3 jobs, Ruby. That's not living. It's temporary," she replied, untying her apron. "David's almost done. Then everything changes." Marco didn't argue. He'd heard this before. Watch this woman sacrifice pieces of herself, hoping to rise. Ruby walked home through streets that flickered with broken streetlights. Her grandmother's ring was gone now, sold to a pawn shop for half what it was worth. The money paid for David's final semester books. He'd kissed her forehead that night, called her his angel, promised her mountains and oceans. The apartment door creaked open to darkness. David sat at their second-hand desk, surrounded by papers, his face illuminated by a laptop screen she'd bought with her tax return. "Hey," she whispered, not wanting to break his concentration. He didn't turn around. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning?" Ruby's stomach dropped. She'd forgotten. Between the diner, the warehouse, and the weekend cleaning gig, she'd completely forgotten. "I'm sorry. I'll get it tomorrow before—" "I needed it for the presentation tomorrow." His voice carried that edge, the one that appeared whenever stress pressed down on his shoulders. "This is important, Ruby. This could be my whole future." "Our future," she wanted to say. Instead, she nodded. "I'll go now. The place is open until midnight." "Forget it." He finally looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion carved into his features. "Just forget it." She crossed the small space between them, her fingers finding the knots in his shoulders. He tensed, then slowly relaxed under her touch. "You're going to be amazing tomorrow," she said softly. "You're the smartest person I've ever met." David's hand came up, covering hers. For a moment, he was the man who'd held her during thunderstorms, who'd danced with her in this tiny kitchen. "What would I do without you?" "You'll never have to find out." She meant it. Through every shift, every aching muscle, every moment she wanted to collapse, Ruby held onto this vision. David succeeding, them building something beautiful together. The presentation went perfectly. David came home with news of job offers, opportunities, doors opening. Ruby celebrated by making his favorite meal with ingredients she'd been saving for. "We did it," he said, pulling her close. "We actually did it." "You did it," she corrected, but he shook his head. "No, I couldn't have survived without you, Ruby. You're my foundation." She wouldn't forget. How could she? Every choice she'd made, every piece of herself she'd given away, was for this moment. The months that followed felt like watching a flower bloom in fast motion. David accepted a position that paid more than Ruby had seen in her entire life. They moved to a better apartment with heat that actually worked. They bought a used car so Ruby wouldn't have to take 3 buses. She quit the warehouse job, then the cleaning gig, finally just working at the diner because she liked Marco. Marriage came quickly after, a small ceremony that David's parents barely attended. Maxwell had insisted on protecting David's future with papers Ruby signed without really reading. Just a formality, David had assured her when she hesitated over the prenuptial agreement. She'd signed because she trusted him, but something else was blooming too, something she couldn't quite name. David worked longer hours, came home later, spoke less about his day and more about his plans. The tender touches became fewer. The conversations grew shorter. "I'm thinking about going back to school," Ruby mentioned one evening, curled up on their new couch. "Maybe studying design, something creative." David glanced up from his phone, his attention fleeting. "That's nice. Hey, I need you to pick up my mother from the airport on Thursday." Ruby's heart sank. His mother, Patricia Cole, had made her opinions about Ruby clear. "Working class," she'd called her, the words dripping with distaste. "David, about school. We'll talk about it later, okay? I've got a huge presentation coming up." He returned to his phone, and Ruby felt herself becoming invisible. Thursday arrived wrapped in anxiety. Patricia Cole stepped out of the airport with luggage that cost more than Ruby's entire wardrobe. Her eyes scanning Ruby with unconcealed disapproval. "The car's this way," Ruby said, reaching for one of the bags. Patricia pulled it away. "I can manage." The drive to the apartment felt eternal. Patricia commented on every flaw. The neighborhood wasn't prestigious enough. The building lacked character. Surely David deserved better. "He worked very hard," Ruby agreed quietly. "And you were there for the ride," Patricia replied, her smile sharp as glass. "How fortunate for you." Ruby's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She wanted to scream that she'd bled for David's success. Instead, she remained silent, because David had asked her to be patient with his mother. The apartment tour was a masterclass in passive cruelty. Patricia praised everything David had chosen, ignored everything Ruby had contributed, and made casual observations about temporary situations. When David came home, his face brightened seeing his mother. He kissed her cheek, asked about her flight, poured her expensive wine Ruby didn't even know they had. "Ruby took good care of you?" he asked. "Oh, she drove adequately," Patricia replied, and David laughed like it was a joke. Ruby excused herself to start dinner, her hands shaking as she chopped vegetables. Through the doorway, she heard Patricia's voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's sweet, David, but is this really what you want long-term? You're going places now. You need someone who can elevate you." Ruby waited for David's defense. Instead, she heard only silence, then the clink of wine glasses. Then David changing the subject. That night, after Patricia left for her hotel, Ruby lay beside David and felt more alone than she'd ever been. "Your mother doesn't like me," she finally said. "She's just protective. Give her time." "David, she basically called me dead weight." "You're being too sensitive." He turned away, pulling the blanket with him. "Can we not do this tonight? I'm exhausted." Ruby stared at the ceiling, counting cracks, and wondered when exactly we had become I and you. Graduation day arrived with spring sunshine and promises wrapped in expensive paper. Ruby stood in the crowd, wearing a dress she'd sewn herself because David had forgotten to mention it was formal until the night before. She watched him cross the stage, shake hands with important people, accept awards that had her fingerprints all over them, even though her name appeared nowhere. Afterward, during the reception, David introduced her to colleagues and mentors. "This is Ruby," he'd say, "and nothing more. Not my partner, not the woman who made this possible, just Ruby," like she was an accessory he'd brought along because it was expected. Patricia cornered her near the refreshment table. "You know, dear, David's going to move in very different circles now. It might be kind to let him go before you embarrass him." "Excuse me." Ruby's voice came out stronger than she felt. "I'm trying to help you. You're clearly a good person, but you're out of your depth. David needs someone who understands his world, who can navigate it with grace and sophistication. Someone with the right background, the right connections, the right breeding." Ruby felt something crack inside her chest. "I'm the one who gave him this world. I worked 3 jobs so he could study. I sold my grandmother's jewelry so he could finish. I held him together when everyone else, including you, walked away." Patricia's smile never wavered. "How noble. But nobility doesn't open doors, dear. Pedigree does. You were useful then. Now you're just in the way." Ruby walked away before the tears could fall, found a bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and finally let herself break. She'd given everything, and somehow she'd become nothing. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, tired and small and fading. When she emerged, David was laughing with a group of polished people who looked like they'd never known hunger or desperation. She stood at the edge, invisible again, until he finally noticed her. "There you are. Come meet everyone." He pulled her into the circle, but didn't include her in the conversation, just kept her there like proof of something she couldn't understand. That night, back in their apartment, David poured champagne and talked about his future with an excitement that used to include her. Ruby listened, smiled, nodded, and felt herself disappearing word by word. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said suddenly, pulling her close. Ruby wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that all of this was temporary, that once things settled, they'd find each other again. She wanted to believe in the man who'd promised her mountains and oceans. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too," he replied, but the words felt automatic, rehearsed, like dialogue from a play he'd performed too many times. Years from now, Ruby would look back on this moment and realize it was the beginning of the end. But tonight, she held on, because letting go meant admitting that everything she'd sacrificed had been for a man who was already gone. 5 years later, David Call became the youngest CEO in his industry, and Ruby stopped recognizing the man who slept beside her. Chapter 2. The Price of Power. Success has a way of revealing who people truly are, and David Call's true face was carved from ice and ego. The house smelled like money, expensive candles, fresh flowers delivered weekly, leather furniture that cost more than Ruby's childhood home. She walked through rooms that echoed with emptiness. David's transformation hadn't been sudden. It was erosion, piece by piece. The man who once held her hand now walked 3 steps ahead. The man who used to ask about her day now checked his phone if she spoke longer than 30 seconds. "I'm thinking about taking a pottery class," Ruby said one morning, pouring coffee. "There's a studio downtown that—" David replied, not looking up from his tablet. "Did you call about getting the gate fixed?" Ruby's words died in her throat. She set down the coffee pot, watching him scroll. "David, did you hear me?" "The gate, Ruby. It's been broken for 3 days. People notice these things are people, not him. He hadn't used that gate in weeks, always parking in the private garage. I'll call them," she said quietly. He nodded, satisfied, and left without finishing his coffee or acknowledging her presence beyond their conversation's utility. The anniversary arrived on a Tuesday. Ruby spent the afternoon preparing David's favorite meal, setting the table with their good china, lighting candles. She'd even splurged on wine from a year that meant something to them, back when years and memories mattered. She waited. The food cooled. The candles burned lower. David arrived after midnight, still on his phone, barely glancing at the cold dinner. "Sorry, things ran late," he said, not sounding sorry. "I grabbed something at the office." Ruby felt something fundamental shift. "It's our anniversary." "I know. We'll celebrate this weekend, okay?" He loosened his tie, heading toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted." "Don't wait up." She didn't follow. She sat at that carefully prepared table, poured herself wine, and finally admitted what she'd been avoiding. She was married to a ghost of the man she loved. Patricia's visits became more frequent, and with each one, Ruby felt herself shrinking. David's mother would walk through offering suggestions that were really criticisms. "The living room feels so common," Patricia said during one visit, running her finger along a bookshelf. "David, darling, when you move up, you'll need someone who understands proper design." "Mom, Ruby decorated this room." "I know." Patricia's smile could freeze oceans. "That's what I mean." Ruby waited for David's defense. Instead, he laughed uncomfortably and changed the subject. Each time he chose silence over her dignity, another piece of Ruby's hope crumbled. His colleagues treated her like furniture during parties they hosted. The wives, draped in labels Ruby couldn't pronounce, would cluster discussing private schools, vacation homes, charity boards. "Ruby, you must join us," one said during a cocktail party. "We're discussing the symphony season. Are you familiar with classical music?" Some," Ruby replied carefully. "How quaint. David must enjoy having someone so unpolished, like having a blank canvas." The other women laughed, and Ruby realized the joke was her existence. She glanced at David across the room. He caught her eye, saw her standing alone among these predators, and looked away. The next morning, she tried to talk to him about it. "Your colleagues' wives were cruel last night. They were just having fun. You're too sensitive. David, they called me unpolished. They made me feel like I don't belong in my own home. Maybe if you made more effort to fit in." He trailed off, but the implication hung between them like poison gas. "Fit in? I cook, I clean, I manage this entire house. I make sure your life runs smoothly. What more do you want?" "I want a wife who doesn't embarrass me." The words exploded out of him, raw and brutal. "I want someone who knows which fork to use, who can discuss something beyond grocery lists and household maintenance. I want a partner who elevates me, not drags me down." Ruby felt every syllable like a physical blow. "Drags you down? I built you up, David. I gave everything so you could become this person who's now ashamed of me." "I'm not ashamed. He softened slightly, seeing her tears. "I'm just disappointed, Ruby. Can't you try harder?" "Try harder." As if she hadn't been trying her entire life. As if her efforts weren't enough, would never be enough, because the problem wasn't her actions, but her existence. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Be better. Look better. Act better. Be someone I'm proud to introduce. Not someone I have to explain." He left her standing there, drowning in inadequacy, while he grabbed his briefcase and headed to a world where she'd never truly belonged. Ruby spent that day wandering through their house, seeing it differently now. This wasn't her home. It was a museum to David's success, and she was just another artifact he'd collected along the way, now outdated and out of place. She found herself in his study, surrounded by awards and framed articles praising his accomplishments. Her eyes landed on a particular photograph, David accepting his first major promotion. Ruby had been there that day, standing just outside the frame, invisible even then. Her phone buzzed with a message from David. "Dinner with clients tonight. Don't wait up." No apology. No acknowledgement of their fight. Just another absence in a marriage built on them. Ruby opened her laptop, something she rarely did anymore. She'd stopped having dreams of her own, stopped imagining a future beyond managing David's present. But today something stirred inside her, a whisper of who she used to be before she became the woman David was ashamed of. She searched for local art classes, community centers, places where she might remember what it felt like to create something, to be someone beyond David Call's wife. Then she heard the garage door. "David, home early for once." She closed the laptop quickly, guilty for even daring to think about herself. He found her in the study, his expression tight with stress. "We need to talk about something." Ruby braced herself, not knowing what fresh disappointment awaited. "There's a gala next month. Important people will be there. I need you to—" He struggled with the words. "I need you to get a stylist or something. New dress, hair, makeup. Whatever it takes to look the part of your wife. The part of a CEO's wife. There's a difference, Ruby. Surely you can see that." She saw it clearly. She saw that the woman she'd become in this marriage was never going to be enough. She saw that David's love came with conditions she could never meet. She saw that she'd lost herself trying to be someone worthy of a man who no longer valued her. "I'll handle it," she said flatly. "Thank you." He moved to leave, then paused. "Ruby, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to help you understand my world." "Your world," she repeated. "Not our world. Your world." He didn't correct her, and his silence said everything his words never would. That night, Ruby lay awake beside her husband, listening to him breathe, and realized she'd been holding her breath for years, waiting for him to see her, to value her, to remember why he'd loved her in the first place. But David Call had become someone who only loved things that reflected glory back on himself. And Ruby Tyson had become a woman who reflected nothing but sacrifice and shadows. The gala loomed like a guillotine, and Ruby prepared for it like a prisoner preparing for execution. She bought the dress David's assistant recommended, sat through hours of styling that made her look like someone else entirely, practiced walking in heels that pinched with every step. On the night of the event, David looked at her and nodded approvingly. "Much better. See? You can be stunning when you try." Ruby looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She'd erased herself to become acceptable to David, and the victory felt like death. At the gala, she played her part perfectly. She smiled, made small talk, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, and watched David bask in the attention of people who admired his success. He introduced her to important guests with pride for the first time in years, and Ruby understood with devastating clarity. He wasn't proud of her. He was proud of what she'd made herself into for him. When they returned home that night, David was euphoric. "You were perfect tonight. That's the Ruby I need. Can you be her more often?" Ruby removed the expensive jewelry, the uncomfortable dress, the mask she'd worn all evening. "I don't know who that woman was tonight, but she wasn't me. She was the best version of you. She was a version that doesn't exist. She was what you wanted me to be." "What's wrong with that?" David genuinely didn't understand. "I'm trying to help you be better." Ruby looked at this man she'd sacrificed everything for and finally saw him clearly. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession. He didn't want Ruby Tyson. He wanted a reflection of his own success. "I don't want to be better at being what you want," she said quietly. "I want to be enough as I am." David's expression hardened. "Then you're always going to disappoint me. Then you're always going to disappoint me." Those words would haunt Ruby for months to come, echoing in every silent meal, every empty conversation. Every moment she felt herself disappearing inside a marriage that had become her cage. She thought about the prenuptial agreement she'd signed years ago without reading it carefully, how she'd trusted David completely then. That trust felt like a lifetime ago, like it belonged to a different woman, entirely one who still believed love was enough to protect her. Ruby realized she hadn't just lost her husband to his ambition, she'd become invisible in her own marriage. Chapter 3. The Circle of Wolves. David's family didn't just tolerate Ruby, they sharpened, and their teeth on her dignity. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with gold letters. "You are cordially invited to brunch at the Call estate." Not their estate. David's family home, where Patricia presided like a queen. These gatherings happened monthly, and each felt like walking through a minefield. "Do I have to go?" Ruby asked David. "It's family. Of course you have to go." He barely looked up. And Ruby, please dress appropriately this time. My sister mentioned you looked underdressed last month. Ruby glanced at her closet, filled with neat, clean clothes. Just not expensive enough for the Call family standards. I'll do my best, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. The Call estate sprawled across perfectly manicured grounds. Ruby pulled up in their used car, the one purchased from David's early success that he now pretended didn't exist, parking between vehicles that cost more than some houses. She sat gathering courage, watching David's sister Nora greet guests like royalty receiving peasants. There she is, Nora called out as Ruby approached. We were starting to worry you'd gotten lost. Traffic was heavy? On a Sunday morning, Nora's eyebrows raised. How curious. Well, come in. We've already started, but I'm sure no one will mind you joining late. Ruby hadn't been late. The invitation said 11. It was 10:57. The dining room glittered with crystal and china, filled with women who looked like they'd stepped from magazine pages. David's cousins, his mother's friends, Nora's social circle, all dressed in casual elegance that cost thousands. They turned to look at Ruby with synchronized precision. Ruby, darling. Patricia rose from the head of the table, air-kissing near Ruby's cheeks without making contact. That's such an interesting outfit. Very thrift store chic. Is that intentional? The table tittered with polite laughter. It's just a dress, Ruby replied, sliding into the empty chair at the far end. Of course it is. Patricia's smile could cut glass. I keep telling David that some women have natural style and others need guidance. The brunch continued like slow torture. Every topic circled back to Ruby's inadequacy. When they discussed vacation homes, someone mentioned how challenging it must be for Ruby having grown up with so little. When they talked about charity work, Patricia noted that Ruby didn't serve on any boards, but then again, those positions require certain connections. David's cousin Helena addressed Ruby directly. Ruby, what exactly do you do all day? You don't work. You don't have children. How do you fill your time? I read a lot, and I've been thinking about taking some classes. Classes? Helena clapped mockingly. In what? Art design, maybe. The table erupted in barely concealed laughter. Design, Nora repeated, wiping her eyes delicately. Oh, Ruby, that's adorable. At your age, starting something like that? It's like playing dress-up, isn't it? A little hobby to pass the time. Some people have real careers, Patricia added, smiling at the other women. Others have hobbies. Both are valid, I suppose. Ruby felt tears threatening and swallowed them down. She would not give these vultures the satisfaction of seeing her break. The conversation moved on, leaving Ruby behind like roadkill. They discussed upcoming galas, political fundraisers, social events that Ruby would attend on David's arm, like an accessory he was required to bring. No one asked her opinion. No one included her in discussions. She existed at this table only as a target. When brunch finally ended, Ruby escaped to the bathroom, locking herself in marble and gold opulence, pressing her palms against the cool sink. She stared at her reflection, a woman who'd lost herself somewhere between love and humiliation. A knock startled her. Ruby. It's Nora. Ruby opened the door, finding David's sister standing there with an expression that might have been concern on anyone else's face. I hope you're not upset about earlier. We were just joking around. Those weren't jokes, Nora. Those were cruelties dressed up as jokes. Nora's face hardened. You're too sensitive. We're David's family. We want what's best for him. And you don't think I'm what's best for him. Honestly? Nora stepped closer, her voice dropping. No, I don't. You were fine when David was nobody. You were the sweet little girlfriend who kept him grounded. But he's someone now, Ruby. He needs a woman who matches his stature. Someone with breeding, education, sophistication. Someone who doesn't embarrass him. I don't embarrass him. You exist, and that's embarrassing enough. You're a reminder of where he came from, and darling, that's a place he's trying very hard to forget. Nora patted Ruby's shoulder with false sympathy. I'm not being cruel. I'm being honest. The kindest thing you could do for David is let him go find someone appropriate. Ruby shoved past her, nearly running down the hallway, desperate to escape this house that felt like a mausoleum of her self-worth. She found David outside, laughing with his father and uncles, holding a drink, looking completely at ease. He saw her approaching and his expression shifted, not to concern, but to mild irritation. Ready to go already? We just got here. I need to leave now. Ruby, don't be dramatic. What happened? Your family happened. Your sister just told me I'm an embarrassment to you and suggested I should leave you so you can find someone more appropriate. David glanced back at his family, then at Ruby, and she saw calculation in his eyes. She probably didn't mean it like that. That's exactly how she meant it, and you know it. Are you going to defend me, David? Or are you going to stand here making excuses for them? He shifted uncomfortably. Look, they're protective. They see how hard I work, how much pressure I'm under. They want me to have a life that's easy, and I make your life hard. You make it complicated. The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and Ruby saw the truth he'd been hiding. He agreed with them. Maybe not consciously, maybe not completely, but somewhere deep inside, David Call believed his wife was beneath him. I'm going home, Ruby said quietly. You can stay, Ruby. Stay, David. Enjoy your family. I'm sure they're more fun without me here to embarrass everyone. She drove home, with tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. When she pulled into their driveway, she sat in the car for a long time, wondering how she'd become this woman. Invisible, belittled, tolerated at best. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood ran cold. It was a photograph from the brunch, taken when she'd left the table briefly. The women were all leaning together, laughing, and the caption read, "When the help tries to eat with the family." It had been posted to a private social media group, shared among David's entire social circle. Ruby scrolled through the comments, each one worse than the last. Poor David, stuck with her. She's like a puppy that followed him home. Someone needs to take her to a shelter. I give it another year before he trades up. Ruby deleted the app, but the damage was done. They weren't just mocking her in private anymore. They'd made humiliating her a spectator sport. David came home late that night, slightly drunk, smelling like expensive cigars and his father's cologne. You left me there like an idiot, he said, loosening his tie. Had to explain why my wife ran off in the middle of a family gathering. Your sister told me to leave you, David. Your mother called me thrift store chic. Your cousin implied I'm worthless. And you stood there and let them. They're just words, Ruby. Why do you let them get to you? Because they hurt. Because I'm your wife, and you're supposed to protect me, not offer me up for slaughter. David rubbed his face, tired of this conversation before it even started. I can't control what they say. I can only control what I do. Then what do you do, David? What have you ever done except stand by while they tear me apart? He looked at her with something close to resentment. I married you, didn't I? I gave you this life, this house, this status. What more do you want? I want you to love me. I want you to defend me. I want to be more than just a burden you're stuck with. Then maybe you should try being less of a burden, he shot back. Maybe if you fit in better, if you tried harder, if you were someone they could respect instead of pity, I wouldn't have to defend you all the time. You've never defended me once. The silence that followed was deafening. David had no response because they both knew she was right. He went upstairs without another word, leaving Ruby standing in the foyer of a house that would never be home. Married to a man who'd become a stranger. She pulled out her phone and opened the photo of the women mocking her. She stared at it for a long time, memorizing their faces, their cruelty, their absolute certainty that she was nothing. Then she did something she hadn't done in years. She opened a blank document and started writing. Not a grocery list, not a schedule for David's appointments, but thoughts, feelings, dreams she'd buried so deep she'd forgotten they existed. I am Ruby Tyson, she wrote, and I used to be someone. The words felt like resurrection, but she wasn't ready yet. The courage required to leave wasn't something she'd built up. So she closed the document, climbed into bed beside her husband, and continued the slow disappearance she'd been practicing for years. The worst betrayal wasn't the insults Ruby endured. It was watching David laugh along with them. Chapter 4. The Breaking Point. There are moments that define a marriage, and this family gathering would expose theirs as already dead. The house buzzed with preparation for Maxwell Call's birthday celebration. David's father was turning 70, and Patricia had decided to host an intimate gathering of 50 close friends. Ruby had been planning this party for weeks. "It's the least you can do, dear," Patricia had said. "Show us you're capable of something." She'd spent hours perfecting every detail. The caterers, decorations, the elaborate birthday cake, one she'd insisted on baking herself despite Patricia's doubts, sat in the refrigerator. "This is your chance," David had told her the night before. "My mother is finally giving you an opportunity to prove yourself. Don't mess it up. Not thank you for doing this. Not I'm proud of you. Just don't mess it up." Like she was a child being trusted with a simple task she'd probably bungle. The guests arrived in waves of designer clothing and practiced smiles. Ruby wore her best dress, the one David had approved of, and stood near the entrance greeting people who looked through her like glass. "Ruby," Patricia swept in wearing silk and disapproval. "The flower arrangements are too low. People won't be able to see each other across the tables. I arranged them according to the florist's recommendation." Well, the florist was wrong. "Fix it before dinner." Patricia moved on, leaving Ruby to scramble. David's business partner, Graham, arrived with his wife, both exuding confidence that came from never doubting their place. Graham clapped David on the shoulder, pulling him into conversation. His wife, Lydia, found Ruby adjusting flowers. "Still playing housewife, Ruby? How domestic of you." "I'm hosting," Ruby replied, keeping her voice steady. "Of course you are. What else would you do?" Lydia accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server. "I always tell Graham that some women are born to support greatness, others to achieve it. Different roles, equally valid." The implication hung in the air like poison. Ruby was the former, and they all knew it. In the kitchen, Ruby checked on the cake one final time. She'd spent 2 days perfecting it, layering David's father's favorite flavors, creating decorative elements that showcased skill she'd taught herself through months of practice. It was beautiful, and for once she felt genuinely proud of something she'd created. Nora walked in, her heels clicking against the tile. "Mother wants to know when you're serving appetizers. People are getting impatient. They're about to go out now." "Good, and Ruby?" Nora's voice dropped to that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound kind while delivering cruelty. "Try not to draw too much attention to yourself tonight. This is Father's evening, not yours. I'm hosting his party, Nora. I have to be somewhat visible." "Visible, yes. Center of attention, no. There's a difference." Nora examined her manicure, not looking at Ruby. "David mentioned you've been sensitive lately. We're all walking on eggshells around you. It's exhausting." Ruby's hand stilled on the counter. "You're walking on eggshells. You, who told me I should leave my own husband. You who share photos mocking me online. That's walking on eggshells." "See? There's that sensitivity again." Nora sighed dramatically. "We're just being honest, Ruby. Honesty isn't cruelty." "Yes, it is. When honesty is designed to hurt, it's absolutely cruelty." Nora's expression hardened. "You know what? Fine. You want brutal honesty? You're dragging David down. Everyone sees it. He's brilliant, charismatic, destined for incredible things, and you're the anchor around his neck. He's too loyal to say it, too kind to leave you, but we all know he'd be better off without you. There's your honesty, Ruby. How does it feel?" Ruby felt something inside her crystallize, not breaking, but hardening into something sharp and unbreakable. "It feels clarifying. Thank you, Nora." She pushed past David's sister and headed into the living room where guests had gathered. David stood at the center of a circle of admirers, telling some story that had everyone laughing. He looked happy, confident, completely in his element. Ruby approached, and the circle shifted to include her reluctantly. David's arm came around her waist automatically, but the gesture felt mechanical. "There's my wife," he said, something in his tone making it sound like an apology. Graham raised his glass. "David, you've built an empire in such a short time. What's the secret?" "Hard work, strategic thinking, surrounding myself with the right people." David's eyes scanned the crowd, landing everywhere except on Ruby. "And family support must help," someone else added, glancing at Ruby with barely concealed pity. "Oh, absolutely," Graham interjected before David could respond. "Though some family members are more supportive than others, right, David? I mean, you've done all this basically on your own merit." The circle murmured agreement, and Ruby felt herself becoming invisible again, standing right there in her husband's arm, while everyone erased her contributions from the narrative of his success. Dinner was served with military precision. Ruby had organized every course, timed everything perfectly, ensured dietary restrictions were accommodated. Patricia didn't mention it. David didn't acknowledge it. As dessert time approached, Ruby excused herself to prepare the cake. In the kitchen, she lit the candles carefully, pride swelling despite everything. This cake was hers. She wheeled it out on a cart, candlelight casting warm glows across faces that had spent the evening treating her like she was invisible. The room erupted in appreciative sounds. It really was stunning. Maxwell stood ready to make his wish, and Ruby felt momentary accomplishment. Then Graham's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Did you order this from Martinelli's, Patricia? It looks exactly like their signature style." "Oh, I'm sure it is," Patricia replied smoothly, not bothering to correct him. "Only the best for Maxwell." Ruby's mouth opened to clarify, to claim this one thing she'd created. But David spoke first. "Actually," he said, and Ruby's heart lifted, thinking he was finally going to defend her, acknowledge her effort. "Actually, Ruby made it herself." The room fell silent for a beat, then Graham laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that others quickly joined. "Ruby made this?" Graham gestured at the elaborate cake. "What, following an online tutorial?" "At least she's good for something domestic," Lydia added, her voice carrying across the room. "Every wife should have some skill, I suppose." "Some skill," someone echoed, and the laughter grew. Ruby stood there, candles melting on her cake, watching room full of people mock her effort. But worse, so much worse, was watching David stand among them and say nothing. His silence wasn't neutrality, it was agreement. Maxwell blew out the candles, making his wish, and the party continued like Ruby's humiliation was just background entertainment. She cut the cake with hands that had gone numb. She served pieces to people who didn't say thank you. She cleaned up while conversations swirled around her about topics she wasn't included in. In a corner of the room, she heard Helena talking to a group of women, her voice carrying just enough for Ruby to hear. "I honestly don't understand what David sees in her. She brings nothing to the table, no connections, no sophistication, no ambition. She's just there, like furniture you're too lazy to replace." "Maybe he feels sorry for her," another woman suggested. "You know, she was with him when he had nothing. Perhaps he thinks he owes her something. The debt's been paid, surely. He's given her this life, this house. At some point, gratitude expires." Ruby set down the cake knife and walked away. She didn't run, didn't make a scene, just quietly left the room and climbed the stairs to their bedroom. She could hear the party continuing below, nobody noticing or caring about her absence. She sat on the edge of their bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. The woman looking back was a stranger, hollowed out, diminished, barely there. A knock startled her. She expected David, finally noticing she'd left. Instead, Patricia entered without waiting for permission. "Leaving your own party? How rude!" "Your party," Ruby corrected quietly. "I just organized it." "And did an adequate job, I suppose." Patricia sat in the reading chair, examining Ruby like a specimen. "I wanted to talk to you privately. I don't think I can handle any more honesty tonight." "Too bad. You're going to hear this anyway." Patricia folded her hands in her lap, the picture of composed cruelty. "David is going to leave you eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not next year, but it's inevitable. He's outgrown you, Ruby. Everyone sees it except you. He's my husband. He's my son. I know him better than you ever will. I've watched him his entire life, seen him shed things that no longer serve him. You were useful once. You're not anymore. Ruby felt tears threatening, but refused to let them fall in front of this woman. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm giving you a chance to leave with dignity. Walk away now before he pushes you out. File for divorce? Take a reasonable settlement. Disappear from his life with your head held high. It's better than waiting for him to humiliate you publicly with someone else. You want me to just give up? I want you to face reality. You're not in his league anymore, if you ever were. The kindest thing you can do for both of you is end this charade. Patricia stood, smoothing her dress. Think about it, dear. Pride is worth more than a marriage to someone who doesn't value you. She left, closing the door quietly behind her, and Ruby finally let herself cry. Deep, wrenching sobs that she muffled in a pillow so the party below wouldn't hear her breaking. When David finally came upstairs hours later, the guests gone, the house quiet. Ruby had no tears left. You left early, he said, not accusatory. Just stating fact. Nobody noticed. I noticed. Did you? Because from where I stood, you didn't notice me all night. Not when Graham mocked me, not when your family insulted me, not when I needed you to defend me even once. David sighed, the sound of a man exhausted by a conversation he'd had too many times. Ruby, we've been over this. I can't control what other people say. You can control what you say. You can stand up for your wife. You can tell them to stop. You can do literally anything except stand there silently agreeing with them. I don't agree with them. Your silence says otherwise. Every single time you say nothing, you tell them it's okay to treat me this way. You tell me that I don't matter enough to defend. You tell everyone that they're right. I am beneath you. That's not... David stopped, running his hands through his hair. You're being too sensitive. No, David, I'm being too silent. I've been silent for years while you and your family erode everything I am. I've smiled through insults, swallowed humiliation, and pretended everything is fine because I thought love was enough. But it's not, is it? Love isn't enough when respect is gone. Where is this coming from? Because you got your feelings hurt at a party? Because your mother just told me you're going to leave me eventually? Because your sister posts pictures of me online for people to mock? Because I baked a cake that I was proud of and you let a room full of people laugh at me for it? Because I am disappearing, David, and you're not just letting it happen, you're helping it along. David's jaw tightened. Maybe if you weren't so fragile, so easily hurt, so incapable of handling the real world, we wouldn't have these problems. Grow thicker skin, Ruby. This is life. This isn't life. This is abuse dressed up as honesty. And you know what the saddest part is? I've been so busy trying to be enough for you that I forgot I used to be enough for myself. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm tired, David. I'm tired of fighting for scraps of your attention. I'm tired of being your embarrassment. I'm tired of being married to someone who treats me like I'm an obligation instead of a choice. Ruby. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. No, you're not. We don't do that. We talk things through. There's nothing left to talk about. You've made your position clear. Your family has made their position clear. I'm the problem, and problems need to be solved or discarded. I get it. She grabbed a pillow and headed for the door. David stepped in front of her, but not to comfort her, to assert control. You want to throw a tantrum? Fine, but you're sleeping in that guest room until you apologize for ruining my father's birthday with your drama. Ruby stared at him, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time in years. This wasn't her husband. This was a stranger wearing his face, speaking with his voice, but devoid of anything that had made her fall in love with him. Okay, she said simply. David had expected a fight, tears, begging. Her calm agreement unsettled him. Just like that? Just like that. She walked past him to the guest room, closed the door, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ruby Tyson felt something other than pain. She felt resolve. Ruby understood then that she'd been fighting alone in a marriage that had already ended. She just hadn't signed the papers yet. Chapter 5. The Guest Room Exile. The smallest acts of cruelty often carry the greatest power, and David wielded his like a weapon. Ruby woke in the guest room to unfamiliar light. The party, the humiliation, David banishing her like a disobedient child. The guest room was beautiful in that impersonal hotel way, perfectly decorated, completely empty of anything that mattered. Like her marriage. She showered using generic soap, dressed in yesterday's clothes. Every small indignity felt enormous. David was in the kitchen, coffee in hand, scrolling through his phone like it was any other morning. "Sleep well?" he asked without looking up, his tone neither concerned nor curious, just filling air. "No. Maybe you'll be more reasonable after a few nights in there." He finally glanced at her, and Ruby saw calculation in his eyes. "Are you ready to apologize?" "For what exactly?" "For making a scene, for leaving the party, for embarrassing me in front of my family." He set down his phone, giving her his full attention for the first time in weeks. And Ruby realized he enjoyed this, the power, the control, her obvious distress. "I didn't make a scene. David, I was humiliated by your family, and you stood by watching. I left quietly because I couldn't take any more. You're too sensitive. Stop saying that." The words burst out of her, surprising them both. "Stop telling me I'm too sensitive when people are actively cruel to me. Stop making me feel crazy for having normal reactions to being treated like garbage." David's expression hardened. "I see a night in the guest room taught you nothing. It taught me plenty, just not what you intended. Then I guess you'll be sleeping there again tonight. And the night after. However long it takes for you to learn." "Learn what, David? Learn to accept disrespect? Learn to smile while your family eviscerates me? Learn to be grateful that you tolerate my existence? Learn your place." The words exploded out of him, raw and ugly. "Learn that I'm the one who provides everything, who gave you this life, who made you someone instead of nobody. Learn that you should be grateful instead of constantly complaining." Ruby felt something inside her finally snap. Not breaking, transforming. "You think you made me someone? David, I made you. I worked 3 jobs so you could finish school. I sold my grandmother's jewelry so you could eat. I held you together when you were falling apart. I built you, and you spent years tearing me down to forget you were ever that weak. That's not how I remember it. No, I'm sure it's not. You've rewritten history to make yourself the hero and me the burden. But I was there, David. I remember the truth even if you don't." He grabbed his briefcase, done with this conversation. "You have all day to think about whether this marriage is worth fighting for. When I come home tonight, I expect an apology. Otherwise, you can stay in that guest room indefinitely." "Maybe I will." David paused at the door, thrown by her lack of submission. "What's that supposed to mean?" "A D. It means maybe I'm done apologizing for existing, David. Maybe I'm done begging for scraps of your attention and respect. Maybe I'm done being your wife in name only. You're being dramatic again." "No, I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest." He left without another word, and Ruby stood in their kitchen. His kitchen, really, feeling lighter than she had in months. The truth had a weight, but so did lies. And she'd been carrying his lies about her for far too long. She spent the morning doing something she rarely allowed herself, thinking about her own wants instead of David's needs. She made a list in her head of everything she'd given up. Every piece of herself she discarded to be the wife he wanted, her artistic ambitions abandoned because they weren't practical. Her friends lost because David found them beneath him. Her independence sacrificed because being his wife became her entire identity. Her voice silenced because speaking up made her too sensitive. Ruby pulled out her laptop and opened a document. She stared at the blank page for a long time before typing 5 words. "What do I want now?" The cursor blinked, waiting, and Ruby realized she didn't know. She'd spent so long wanting David's love, his respect, his attention, that she'd forgotten to want anything for herself. She started researching. Art programs, design courses, small studio apartments in different neighborhoods, divorce lawyers, though she couldn't quite bring herself to click those links yet. Each search felt like betrayal and liberation in equal measure. Her phone rang. Patricia's name flashed on the screen. Ruby let it go to voicemail, then listened with morbid curiosity to the message. "Ruby, dear, David mentioned you're being difficult about last night. I think it's important we talk. Come to lunch today. 1 o'clock. I'll send you the address." Not an invitation. A summons. Ruby wanted to ignore it, but part of her needed to hear what Patricia had to say, needed to face this woman one final time with clarity instead of desperation. The restaurant Patricia chose was predictably expensive and intimidating. Ruby drove there in her modest car, parked between luxury vehicles, and walked in wearing her simple dress among women draped in designer everything. Patricia sat at a corner table, already nursing a martini, looking every inch the queen of her domain. "Sit," Patricia said. "I ordered for you. The salad here is excellent. I can order for myself." "Suit yourself." Patricia sipped her drink. "David called this morning. He's quite upset." "Good." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Good? You want your husband upset?" "I want my husband to feel something, even if it's upset. He's been numb to me for so long, I'll take anger over indifference." "How dramatic you are." "David isn't numb to you, Ruby. He's just tired of your neediness." "My neediness," Ruby repeated flatly. "I need basic respect. I need to not be humiliated in my own home. I need my husband to defend me occasionally. Those needs make me needy." Patricia leaned forward, her voice dropping to that particular tone women use when delivering cruelty disguised as wisdom. "You were perfect for David when he had nothing. You were supportive, understanding, willing to sacrifice. Those qualities are lovely in a struggling student's girlfriend. They're less impressive in a CEO's wife. Because CEOs need trophy wives instead of partners. Because successful men need women who enhance their status, not remind them of where they came from." Patricia signaled the waiter for another drink. "David is going places, Ruby. Places you can't follow because you don't belong there. You're a beautiful chapter in his life story, but you're not meant to be the whole book." Ruby felt ice forming in her veins, cold and clarifying. "You want me to leave him. I want you to save yourself the eventual humiliation when he leaves you. Because he will, Ruby. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually David will find someone appropriate. Someone who fits his life instead of complicating it. When that happens, you'll wish you'd left first." "You really believe that?" "I know my son. I know how ruthless ambition makes people. David has spent years climbing, and he won't let anything hold him back now. Not even loyalty to a wife who served her purpose." The waiter brought Patricia's martini and Ruby's water. They sat in silence for a moment, and Ruby felt the weight of everything Patricia wasn't saying. This was a warning and a prophecy. Cruelty and kindness twisted together until you couldn't tell which was which. "What if I fight for him?" Ruby asked quietly. "What if I refuse to just walk away? Then you'll suffer longer before the inevitable ending. Is your pride worth that much pain?" Ruby thought about the guest room, David's cold indifference, the years of slowly disappearing. "Maybe my pride is all I have left." "Then you're even more foolish than I thought." Patricia drained her glass. "I'm trying to help you, Ruby. Not because I like you, I don't, but because I've seen this story before. The wife who doesn't know when to exit gracefully always ends up destroyed. Don't be that wife. What if I told you I was already destroyed? That David and your family have spent years breaking me down piece by piece until I barely recognize myself? Then what's left to lose?" The question hung between them like a blade. What was left to lose? Her marriage was already dead. Her dignity had been shredded. Her sense of self had eroded to almost nothing. What exactly was she holding on to? "Nothing," Ruby said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. "I have nothing left to lose." Patricia smiled, satisfied she'd won this battle. Then we understand each other. Ruby left the restaurant without eating, drove home through streets that suddenly looked different, clearer, like someone had wiped grime off a window she'd been looking through for years. Ruby walked through the house that had never felt like home, touching surfaces that cost more than she was worth to David anymore. In his study, surrounded by awards and framed articles, she opened her side of the closet and started pulling out clothes. She folded items she'd worn, trying to be the woman David wanted. Dresses chosen to impress, shoes that pinched but looked appropriate. Everything carefully selected to erase Ruby Tyson. In the back of her closet, she found boxes, sketchbooks from college, art supplies, books on design David had called frivolous. She opened a sketchbook, seeing drawings from years ago, recognizing abandoned talent. Ruby sat on the guest room floor, surrounded by remnants of who she'd been before becoming Mrs. David Cole, and made a decision. She pulled out her phone and called a number she'd found that morning. And she'd told herself she was just researching, not really considering. Apex Legal Services, how may I help you? Ruby's voice steadied. I need to speak with a divorce attorney. The words felt like jumping off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She made an appointment for the following morning, hung up, and let herself cry, not from sadness but from relief, from the overwhelming sense that she'd finally chosen herself. Evening came. David's car pulled into the garage. Ruby heard him enter, drop his briefcase, call her name. She didn't answer immediately. Let him search, let him wonder, let him feel even a fraction of the invisibility she'd experienced. He found her in the guest room, surrounded by her things, and stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? Moving my stuff. You said I'd be sleeping here indefinitely. Might as well make it comfortable. David's face darkened. This is ridiculous. You're being childish. I'm being obedient. You sent me here, David. I'm just accepting it. I sent you here so you'd learn a lesson, not set up permanent residence. What lesson is that exactly? That you can exile me when I displease you? That our marriage is conditional on my perfect compliance? I think I've learned that one already. He stepped into the room, trying to reassert control. Have you thought about your apology? I've thought about a lot of things. Apologies aren't among them. Ruby, I'm not playing games here. Neither am I, David. For the first time in years, I'm completely serious. Something in her tone must have penetrated because he paused, really looking at her. What's going on with you? I'm waking up. I'm realizing that I've been asleep in a nightmare, pretending it was a dream. I'm understanding that you don't want a wife. You want an appliance. Someone who functions when you need them and disappears when you don't. That's not fair. No, what's not fair is asking someone to love you unconditionally while you barely tolerate their existence. Ruby stood, meeting his eyes. What's not fair is building yourself on someone else's sacrifice, then treating them like they're worthless. What's not fair is letting your family destroy your wife while you stand by and watch. My family was just... Your family was cruel. Your mother told me today that you're going to leave me eventually. Your sister posts pictures of me online for people to mock. Your father's party was a masterclass in humiliation. And you, David, you participated in all of it through your silence. I don't know what you want from me. I wanted you to love me. But you don't, do you? Maybe you never did. Maybe I was just convenient. And then I became inconvenient, and now you're trying to punish me into being convenient again. David ran his hands through his hair, frustration radiating off him. You're twisting everything. I'm finally seeing clearly. Fine, stay in here. See if I care. Sleep in the guest room until you rot, Ruby, but don't expect me to keep trying when you're being impossible. He turned to leave, and Ruby felt the moment crystallizing. This was it. This was where she chose. I have an appointment tomorrow morning, she said quietly. With a divorce attorney. David froze. What? You heard me. He spun around, his face a mixture of shock and rage. You're threatening me. You think threatening divorce will make me come crawling back? I'm not threatening anything. I'm informing you of my decision. Your decision. He laughed, harsh and bitter. You don't get to make decisions, Ruby. I built this life. I provide everything. You're nothing without me. Maybe, but being nothing alone is better than being nothing beside someone who treats me like nothing. You're not serious. I've never been more serious in my life. David stared at her, finally seeing that something fundamental had shifted. Ruby, don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've built. You threw it away years ago. I'm just finally accepting it. I love you. No, you don't. You love the idea of being generous enough to stay with the girl from your past. You love telling yourself you're loyal. But you don't love me, David. You barely like me. He tried to approach her, but she stepped back. Ruby, please. Let's talk about this reasonably. You're upset, I understand. But divorce? That's extreme. What's extreme is staying in a marriage that's killing who I am. I'll do better. I'll talk to my family. I'll defend you. Just don't do this. Ruby wanted to believe him. Part of her, the part that had loved him for years, desperately wanted to believe that he'd change, that they could salvage something from this wreckage. But Patricia's words echoed in her mind. You'll suffer longer before the inevitable ending. I'll think about it, she said finally, not ready to cut all ties yet, but needing space to breathe. But tonight I'm staying here. David nodded, deflated. Okay, we'll talk more tomorrow. He left, closing the door gently behind him, and Ruby sank onto the bed. She'd drawn a line in the sand, and now she had to decide if she'd cross it. She pulled out her phone and opened the voice memo app. Speaking quietly, she began recording. My name is Ruby Tyson. I was born with dreams. I fell in love with a man who had dreams too. I sacrificed mine so his could live. And I forgot that dreams don't belong to one person. They belong to whoever has the courage to chase them. She paused, tears streaming down her face. Tomorrow I might lose my courage. Tomorrow I might convince myself to stay, to try again, to give him one more chance that'll turn into 100 more chances. So I'm recording this now, while I still remember who I could be. Ruby Tyson was someone before David Call. She can be someone after him too. She saved the recording and set it to play as her alarm tomorrow morning. A reminder, a promise. David went to bed satisfied he'd taught his wife a lesson, unaware she was learning an entirely different one. Chapter 6. The morning everything changed. Power shifts happen in silence, and Ruby Tyson had finally found her voice in choosing to leave. Ruby's alarm woke her before dawn. Not the gentle chime David had programmed into her phone, but her own voice speaking words she'd recorded the night before. My name is Ruby Tyson. I was born with dreams. She listened to herself talk about courage and dreams and becoming someone again, and felt yesterday's resolve solidify into something unshakable. Today was the day everything changed. The attorney's office opened at 8. Ruby showered, dressed in clothes that felt like armor, and left the house before David woke. Her first act of independence in years was something as simple as walking out a door without explanation or permission. The law office occupied the 3rd floor of a building downtown. The receptionist smiled warmly, genuinely, like Ruby was a person worth acknowledging. Ms. Tyson? Attorney Chen will see you now. Ruby followed her into an office lined with law books and framed degrees, where a woman in her 40s sat behind a desk covered in organized chaos. I'm Laura Chen. Please, sit. She gestured to a comfortable chair. Tell me why you're here. Ruby opened her mouth and everything spilled out. Years of accumulated pain, humiliation, erasure. She told this stranger things she'd never said aloud, truths she'd barely admitted to herself. Laura listened without judgment, taking notes, nodding at appropriate moments. How long have you been married? Laura asked when Ruby finally stopped. Almost 7 years. And in those 7 years did you work? Not formally, not after the first few. I managed the household, supported his career, hosted events. Does that count? It counts for a lot, actually. You enabled his success. That has value in court, Laura leaned forward. Here's what you need to understand. Divorce is war. The person who wins is usually the one who prepares best. If you're serious about this, we need to start documenting everything. Financial records, communications, evidence of emotional abuse. It wasn't abuse, Ruby interrupted automatically, then stopped. Was it? The isolation, the humiliation, the systematic destruction of her self-worth. What else could you call it? Abuse doesn't have to be physical, Laura said gently. What you're describing, the gaslighting, the public humiliation, the family's coordinated cruelty with your husband's complicity, that's emotional and psychological abuse. It matters. Ruby felt something unlock inside her chest. Abuse. She'd been calling it a difficult marriage because that's what victims did. They minimized. They made excuses. I want out, Ruby said clearly. Tell me what I need to do. They spent 2 hours going through details. Ruby signed papers, provided information, laid the groundwork for her escape. Laura explained the process, the timeline, the likely outcomes. You mentioned a prenuptial agreement, Laura asked. Yes, his father insisted on it when we got married. I signed without really reading it. Laura's expression remained neutral. Do you have a copy? No, I never thought I'd need one. We'll request it in discovery. Prenups can sometimes be challenged if they were signed under duress or without proper legal representation. Did you have your own attorney review it? Ruby shook her head. That might work in our favor. But even with the prenup, given your contributions to his career, you're entitled to some consideration. We'll argue the agreement was unconscionable. I don't want his money. Laura raised an eyebrow. Why not? You earned it, Ruby, not with a paycheck, but with years of your life. Take what you're owed. I just want my freedom. Freedom costs money. You need resources to rebuild. Ruby nodded slowly, understanding the wisdom even if pride made her want to reject anything from David. There's one more thing, Laura said, pulling out a folder. These are divorce papers. You can serve them any time, or you can wait. But if you're sure about this decision, I recommend moving quickly. Don't give him time to hide assets or prepare a counterattack. Ruby took the papers, feeling their weight. This was real. This was happening. Sign here and here. I'll have these filed today. He'll be served within 48 hours. Ruby's hand shook as she signed her name. Ruby Tyson, not Ruby Call. She'd never taken his name, one small rebellion she'd maintained even as she lost everything else. Walking out of that building, Ruby felt sunlight differently. The same city that had felt like a prison yesterday now looked like possibility. She sat in her car for a long moment, breathing in freedom that hadn't quite arrived but was coming. Her phone buzzed. David. Where are you? You left without saying anything. Ruby stared at the message, thought about all the times he'd left without explanation. Out, she typed back. I'll be home later. She drove aimlessly, ending up at a coffee shop she used to frequent before David called it too common. The barista remembered her. Ruby, haven't seen you in forever. The usual. Actually, I'll try something different today. She sat by the window watching people live lives that weren't shaped by someone else's cruelty. A woman laughed loudly. A man sketched in a notebook. A young couple argued over something trivial and then laughed it off. Normal people living normal lives, taking up space without apologizing. Ruby could be that again. Her phone rang. Patricia. Ruby declined the call, then declined the next one, and the one after that. Each rejection felt like victory. A text appeared. David told me you went to see a divorce attorney. This is foolish, Ruby. Call me immediately. Ruby blocked the number. Just like that, years of tolerating Patricia's cruelty ended with a single tap. By early afternoon, Ruby found herself driving back to the house, steeling herself for whatever awaited. She'd left that morning as a wife. She was returning as a woman planning her escape. David's car sat in the driveway. He'd come home early, waiting for her. She walked in to find him pacing the living room, his face a storm of emotions. You went to a divorce attorney? Yes. Are you insane? You can't just, Ruby. This is crazy. We can work this out. And there's nothing to work out, David. This marriage is over. It's been over for years. We just kept pretending. One bad day and you're throwing everything away. One bad day? Ruby laughed, the sound bitter and broken. One bad day? David, there have been 1,000 bad days. This wasn't spontaneous. This was inevitable. He tried to approach her, but she held up her hand. Don't. I made mistakes, okay? I admit it. But divorce? That's extreme. Let's go to counseling. Let's try. Please, Ruby. Counseling won't fix this. You can't counsel someone into respecting their spouse. You can't therapy away years of humiliation. So that's it? You're just done. After everything. After everything, Ruby repeated. That's exactly right. After everything I've endured, I'm finally done enduring. David's expression shifted from desperation to anger. Fine. If you want a divorce, I'll give you one. But don't think you're getting anything from me. You signed a prenup, remember? My father made sure of that. Ruby went cold, remembering that day when she'd signed papers without really reading them, trusting David when he said it was just a formality. She'd been so in love, so certain they'd never need those protections. Now those signatures felt like prophecy. I remember, she said quietly. Then you know you'll walk away with nothing. No house, no money, no support. You'll be exactly where you were when I found you, broke and nobody. If that's what it takes to be free of you, then fine. I'd rather have nothing and my dignity than everything and lose myself. David stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. He couldn't comprehend someone choosing poverty over proximity to him. His ego couldn't process it. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. No, David. Staying with you this long was my biggest mistake. Leaving is the smartest thing I've ever done. She walked past him, heading for the guest room where she'd already started packing. He followed, watching as she methodically removed her belongings from his life. Where will you even go? Anywhere but here. Ruby, stop. Let's talk about this like adults. She spun to face him, and whatever he saw in her expression made him step back. We're past talking. You had years to talk to me like I mattered. You chose silence. You chose your family. You chose your pride. Now I'm choosing me. I love you. You love controlling me. There's a difference. She grabbed a suitcase, started filling it with essentials. Clothes, toiletries, the few items that were truly hers. You can't just leave. Watch me. Ruby, please. Don't do this. I'll change. I'll be better. I'll tell my family to back off. I'll defend you. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't go. She paused, meeting his eyes. For a moment, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with years ago, desperate and lost. But that man was gone, buried under layers of ego and ambition. What stood before her now was just his ghost, haunting her with what could have been. It's too late, David. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. That's not true. We can rebuild. No, we can't, because rebuilding requires both people wanting the same thing, and I finally want something different than you. Which is what? Myself. I want myself back. She zipped the suitcase, grabbed her keys, and headed for the door. David followed her through the house, pleading, bargaining, threatening in turns. If you walk out that door, that's it. We're done. Don't expect to come crawling back when you realize what you've given up. Ruby paused at the threshold, looked back at the house that had been her prison, at the man who'd been her warden. I'm not giving anything up. David, I'm taking something back, me. She walked out into sunshine that felt like baptism, threw her suitcase in her car, and drove away from 7 years of dying slowly. She had nowhere to go, no plan, no safety net. But she had something more valuable than security. She had hope. And for the first time in forever, that felt like enough. David stood in the doorway of their empty house, watching her taillights disappear, finally understanding that the woman he'd underestimated had just walked away from everything and gained herself in return. For the first time in 5 years, David Cole felt genuine fear, not of losing his empire, but of having already lost the only thing that mattered. Chapter 7. Rebuilding from Ash. Freedom is terrifying when you've forgotten how to be your own person. But Ruby Tyson was done being afraid. The motel room smelled like cheap cleaning products and other people's desperation. Ruby sat on a sagging bed, staring at walls the color of surrender, and felt panic claw at her throat. What had she done? She'd walked away from security, stability, a life most people would envy. And for what? To sit in a motel room with a suitcase and $300, wondering where she'd sleep next week. Ruby's phone buzzed continuously. David calling, Patricia calling, Nora sending texts ranging from concerned to vicious. She turned the phone face down. Instead, she opened her laptop and started searching. Jobs, apartments, anything that would give her foundation. The listings crushed her with their requirements. First month, last month, security deposit references, proof of employment. She had none of it. She'd been a housewife for years, invisible in the economy. By midnight, Ruby had applied to 17 positions, ranging from retail to reception, each one a reminder of how far she'd fallen from her dreams. She'd once wanted to be an artist, a designer. Now she'd settle for anything that kept her fed. Morning came with harsh fluorescent lighting and instant coffee that tasted like regret. Ruby checked her email, one response. Her bookstore needed someone immediately. The pay was minimum wage, but it was something. She arrived wearing her nicest dress, her hair pulled back, her hands steady despite the fear. The owner, a woman named Maxine with silver hair and kind eyes, looked over Ruby's bare resume. You haven't worked in years. No, ma'am. Why not? Ruby could have lied. Instead, she told the truth. I was married to someone who wanted me dependent. I lost myself in that marriage. I'm trying to find myself again. Maxine studied her for a long moment. Can you start tomorrow? Relief flooded through Ruby so intensely she nearly cried. Yes, thank you. Ruby showed up. She tried. She shelved books until her back screamed, rang up sales until her feet went numb. At the end of her first shift, Maxine handed her cash payment. You did good today. Keep coming back. Ruby kept coming back. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, painfully, she began building a life that was hers. She found a tiny studio apartment in a neighborhood David would have called dangerous, but where neighbors smiled and held doors. She bought second-hand furniture from thrift stores, mismatched plates from dollar stores, and felt richer than she'd ever felt in David's mansion. The divorce papers were served on a Thursday. David called her phone 23 times that day. Ruby listened to none of the voicemails, blocked his number, and felt lighter with each deletion. She fell into routine. Work at the bookstore by day, online courses in design by night. She'd enrolled in a community program for digital art, using software tutorials and library computers when her laptop struggled. Her assignments were basic, logo designs, color theory exercises, but each one felt like reclaiming pieces of herself. You've got talent, her instructor commented on a project. Real, raw talent. Why did you stop? I forgot I was allowed to have my own dreams, Ruby answered. One evening, a customer came into the bookstore carrying a wedding dress, asking Maxine about alterations. I don't do wedding dresses anymore, Maxine said. Too much pressure. But Ruby might be able to help. Ruby looked up, confused. I don't know how to alter wedding dresses. You know how to sew. This is just fancier fabric. The customer, desperate and on a tight timeline, offered more money than Ruby made in 2 weeks at the store. Ruby took the dress home that night, hands shaking. She worked through the night, careful and methodical, taking apart seams and reconstructing them to fit the woman's measurements. When she finished, exhausted and covered in thread, she looked at what she'd created and felt pride bloom. The customer cried when she saw the finished dress. It's perfect, better than I imagined. Do you have a card? I have friends getting married. Ruby didn't have a card. She had a phone number scrawled on notebook paper and dreams slowly, tentatively, coming back to life. Word spread through quiet channels, brides on budgets, women needing alterations, people wanting custom pieces. Ruby's studio apartment became a workshop. She sewed late into the night after shifts at the bookstore, her back aching, her fingers sore, but her heart full. She created a social media account to showcase her work. Simple posts at first, just photographs of dresses she'd altered or designed. The account grew slowly. 10 followers, then 50, then suddenly 300. Comments appeared. "These are gorgeous. Orders. Where are you located? Your work is incredible." Ruby stared at strangers telling her she had value, that her creations mattered, and cried in her tiny apartment that smelled like fabric and freedom. A fashion blogger discovered her account and wrote a feature. Local designer rises from humble beginnings to create stunning custom pieces. The article didn't mention David or the divorce. It focused solely on Ruby and her talent and her determination. Orders flooded in, more than Ruby could handle while working at the bookstore. She approached Maxine apologetically. "I might need to cut my hours. The sewing work is taking off," Maxine smiled. "I've been wondering when you'd outgrow this place." "Go, Ruby, chase the dream. But I need the income. You've got enough orders to replace this income 3 times over. Stop being afraid of success." Ruby hugged this woman who'd given her a chance when she desperately needed one. Her apartment became a legitimate studio. She bought a proper sewing machine with her first major profit, invested in quality fabrics, created a website. Each step forward felt like stepping further from the woman David had tried to make her into. She ran into David's colleague Graham at a coffee shop one afternoon. He looked right through her at first, then did a double take. "Ruby, is that you?" She straightened, meeting his eyes. "Hello, Graham. I heard about the divorce." "Shame, really. We seemed like a terrible match. And now we're not together. It worked out for the best, I suppose. David's been having a rough time lately. Everything's kind of falling apart for him." Ruby waited for satisfaction to come, for vindication. Instead, she felt only indifference. David's pain wasn't her problem anymore. "I hope he figures it out," she said, meaning it. "If you'll excuse me, I have a client meeting." She walked away, leaving Graham staring after her, probably reporting back to David that his ex-wife looked happy, healthy, and unbothered. She was all those things. Months passed in a blur of fabric and growth. Ruby hired an assistant when orders became overwhelming. She moved to a larger studio space, one with actual retail frontage where customers could visit. She designed her first original clothing line, not just alterations or custom orders, but pieces she created from imagination alone. The launch was small but successful. Local media covered it. Fashion bloggers praised her aesthetic. Orders came in from across the state, then from across the country. Ruby Tyson was becoming someone. Not David Call's wife, not the woman his family had mocked. Just Ruby, designer and creator and survivor. She still had hard days. Days when loneliness crashed over her like waves. Days when she missed the fantasy of what her marriage could have been, even though she didn't miss the reality. Days when doubt whispered that she'd made a mistake, that security was worth more than self-respect. But those days grew further apart, replaced by moments of genuine joy. Seeing a bride cry happy tears over a custom dress. Creating a design that felt perfectly right. Going to sleep exhausted but satisfied, knowing she'd built something that was entirely hers. One evening, as Ruby worked late in her studio, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Ruby Tyson. Speaking. "This is Jessica Ward from Style Collective magazine. We're doing a feature on emerging designers, and your name keeps coming up. Would you be interested in an interview?" Ruby looked around her studio, the fabric scattered across tables, the sewing machines humming, the designs pinned to walls, the life she'd built from nothing. "Yes," she said. "I'd be very interested." After she hung up, Ruby stood at her window watching the city lights and thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, sitting in a motel room, terrified and broken. She wished she could tell that woman what was coming. The fear would fade, the pain would heal, and on the other side of devastation was possibility. Ruby Tyson had once been someone. She'd forgotten that truth for years, but now she was remembering, and more than that. She was becoming something even better, herself, unfiltered and unashamed and entirely free. While David Call commanded boardrooms through fear, Ruby Tyson was building an empire through heart, and the world was starting to notice. Chapter 8. When Kingdoms Crumble. David always believed his success was self-made. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. David sat in his office, staring at resignation letters spread across his desk like accusations. 3 executives in 2 weeks, all citing vague reasons about seeking new opportunities. He knew what they really meant. They were abandoning ship. It started small. A contract fell through after the CEO mentioned hearing about David's reputation issues. A partnership dissolved. Over concerns about his interpersonal conduct, little cracks became fissures, threatening to swallow everything. His assistant knocked. "Sir, your mother is here." Patricia swept in without waiting for permission, her face tight with displeasure. "What is happening, David?" "I just had lunch with Helena, who heard from someone at the club that your company is facing a mass exodus. Is this true?" 3 people resigned. That's hardly mass exodus. 3 important people, people with connections, people who are now spreading rumors about why they left. Patricia sat across from him, her expression sharper than usual. "This is about Ruby, isn't it?" "Ruby has nothing to do with my business. Ruby has everything to do with this. People talk, David. They know about the divorce, about the circumstances. And some of them, surprisingly, feel that you behaved poorly." "Poorly? I gave that woman everything." "You gave her things. You didn't give her respect, and people noticed. David, you built your reputation partly on being a devoted family man. That image is now shattered, and it's affecting how people see you professionally." David wanted to argue, but Patricia's words carried truth he didn't want to acknowledge. His success hadn't been solely about his brilliance. It had been about perception, connections, the image he projected. Ruby had been part of that image, the devoted wife who made him look stable and trustworthy. Without her, he was just another ruthless executive with questionable ethics. "What am I supposed to do? Beg her to come back for appearances?" "It's too late for that. Ruby filed for divorce, David. She's moved on. You need to do damage control." Patricia stood, smoothing her dress. "Fire your current PR team and hire someone who specializes in reputation rehabilitation. And for God's sake, stop telling people how ungrateful Ruby was. It makes you look petty." After she left, David pulled up his phone and searched Ruby's name. The results startled him. Articles about her design work, social media with thousands of followers, photographs of her creations worn by women whose smiles seemed genuine, and Ruby herself, in some photos, looking different, not diminished by their separation, but enhanced. She glowed with something that had been missing when she was with him. The caption under one photo caught his attention. "Designer Ruby Tyson on why she left her old life behind. Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember you're capable of building anything." She was talking about him, about leaving him. And she was thriving. Jealousy and regret twisted inside David's chest like poison. He'd expected Ruby to crumble without him, to come crawling back begging for another chance. Instead, she disappeared and reconstructed herself into someone he barely recognized. His phone buzzed with a text from Nora. "Have you seen Ruby's latest interview? This is a disaster." David found the interview, a local magazine feature about inspiring women. Ruby sat in her studio, surrounded by fabric and creativity, looking serene and successful. "My marriage taught me that you can't build self-worth on someone else's validation," Ruby said in the interview. "I spent years making myself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it saved my life." The interviewer asked if she had regrets. "I regret not leaving sooner." I regret letting fear keep me in a situation that was destroying me. But I don't regret the marriage itself. It taught me exactly what I don't want, which made it easier to build what I do want. David threw his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. She'd reduced their entire marriage to a cautionary tale, a lesson in what not to do. She'd made him the villain in her story of redemption. But the worst part, the part that kept him awake at night, was knowing she was right. Graham stopped by his office later that week with news that more clients were expressing concerns. They're asking about our company culture. Someone posted an anonymous review online claiming we have a toxic leadership problem. Who would do that? Any of the people who left, or any of the people who are thinking about leaving? Graham sat down heavily. David, I'm going to be blunt. The company is struggling because people don't want to work for you anymore. Your reputation has shifted from driven leader to difficult tyrant. That's a problem. I'm not a tyrant. You're cold, David. You're demanding to the point of cruelty. You treat people like they're disposable. Graham hesitated, then continued. You treated Ruby like she was disposable, and everyone saw it. We all watched you humiliate her at parties, ignore her in public, let your family tear her apart. You thought it made you look powerful. It made you look cruel. I loved Ruby. Did you? Because from where I stood, you loved what Ruby did for you. There's a difference. After Graham left, David sat alone in his office as sunset bled across the sky. He thought about Ruby's face at that last party, her quiet dignity as his family mocked her, her silence when he'd sent her to the guest room like she was a child to be punished. He'd thought he was teaching her a lesson. He'd been revealing his true character, and everyone had taken notes. His phone rang. Patricia, again. Your father and I need to talk to you. Come to dinner tonight. The call estate felt different now, less like home and more like a museum of poor choices. His parents sat in the dining room, their expressions grave. David, we're concerned, his father Maxwell began. Your company is floundering, your reputation is damaged, and you seem incapable of accepting responsibility for any of it. I built that company from nothing. No, Patricia interrupted. Ruby built the foundation. You constructed the building, and now it's collapsing because you removed the foundation and expected everything else to stand. Architecture doesn't work that way, David. Neither do relationships. Ruby was just my wife. She didn't contribute to the company. She contributed everything, Maxwell said quietly. She gave you stability, support, and the appearance of being a decent human being. Without her, you're just another executive with a bad attitude, and the market is flooded with those. David felt anger rising. So this is my fault? Ruby leaves, and suddenly I'm the villain? You were always the villain in this story, son. Ruby was just too kind to say so publicly. But now she doesn't have to. Your actions speak loud enough on their own. Patricia's voice held unusual softness, almost pity. I pushed her to leave. I thought I was protecting you from dead weight. I was wrong. Ruby wasn't holding you back, she was holding you together. The admission hit David like physical force. His own mother, who'd spent years belittling Ruby, was now defending her. It's too late to fix things with Ruby, Maxwell continued. She's moved on, built a life, found success without you. But it's not too late to fix yourself, to learn from this, to become someone worth respecting again. How? David asked, hating how broken he sounded. Start by acknowledging what you did wrong, publicly, privately, completely. Stop making excuses. Stop blaming Ruby for having boundaries. Accept that you treated someone who loved you with contempt, and that it cost you everything important. David drove home, through streets that seemed darker than usual, his parents' words echoing in his head. At some point during the drive, he started crying, not the angry tears of frustration, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone finally seeing themselves clearly and hating what they saw. He'd destroyed his marriage because he'd forgotten how to value anything that didn't serve his ego. He'd lost Ruby because he'd treated her like an accessory instead of a person. And now his entire life was crumbling, because without her steadying presence, he was revealed as exactly what he'd become, a hollowed-out man filled with nothing but ambition and pride. The house felt enormous and empty. Ruby's absence was everywhere. In the kitchen she'd kept organized, in the garden she'd tended, in the quiet spaces where her laughter used to live. David pulled out his phone and opened the blocked calls folder. Dozens of messages he'd sent to Ruby, begging and threatening and bargaining. She'd never responded to any of them. He sent one more, different from all the others. "You were right about everything. I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I needed you to know. You deserved better than me. You deserve the happiness you found. I'm glad you got free." He didn't expect a response. He didn't get one. Instead, over the following weeks, David watched Ruby's success grow from a distance. Magazine features, online features, speaking engagements at design conferences. Each new achievement was proof that she'd never needed him. He'd needed her, and he'd realized it too late. His company continued its decline. More employees left. More deals fell through. The empire he'd built on Ruby's sacrifice was dismantling itself piece by piece, revealing that without her foundation, it had all been hollow. Nora called one evening. "I saw Ruby at a gallery opening. She looked incredible, happy. She didn't even acknowledge me." "Good," David said, surprising himself and his sister. "She doesn't owe us acknowledgement. We don't deserve it. When did you become so philosophical?" "When I lost everything that mattered and realized I did it to myself." David sat in his empty house that night, surrounded by expensive things that meant nothing, and understood with devastating clarity Ruby had never been his weakness. She'd been his strength, and he'd thrown her away to prove he didn't need strength. Now he was discovering that everyone needs something to hold them steady, and he'd destroyed his only anchor. The question wasn't whether he'd made a mistake. The question was whether he was capable of learning from it, of becoming someone better, of earning redemption he'd never receive. David didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time in his life, he understood that some questions were more important than success, and some failures taught more than any victory ever could. David finally understood the terrible truth. Ruby had never needed him. He had always needed her. Chapter 9. The Weight of Realization. Some men spend their whole lives chasing power, only to discover they destroyed what actually made them powerful. The house echoed with David's footsteps as he wandered through rooms that suddenly felt like crime scenes. Every space held evidence of Ruby's absence. The kitchen where she'd cooked meals he barely tasted. The reading nook where she'd curled up with books while he ignored her. He'd been living here alone for months now. But tonight, the emptiness felt suffocating. David pulled a box from the hall closet one Ruby had left behind. Inside were photo albums from their early years. He sat on the floor, whiskey glass in hand, and opened the first one. There they were, Ruby and David before ambition ate him alive. College photos, where his eyes looked clear and hers looked hopeful. Their small wedding, nothing like the grand affair his parents wanted. He traced Ruby's face in a photograph from their honeymoon. She was laughing at something off camera, her joy so pure. When had she stopped laughing like that? When had he stopped being someone worth laughing with? The answer was brutal. The moment success became more important than her happiness. His phone buzzed with another email from Graham about the company's declining prospects. David deleted it without reading. The company could burn for all he cared tonight. He found a journal buried in the box, Ruby's handwriting filling pages with thoughts she'd never shared aloud. David knew reading it was a violation, but he was already guilty of so many violations against her. What was one more? He hesitated, then noticed a sticky note on the first page. "For David, when you're ready to understand." She'd left it deliberately, wanting him to see what he'd done through her eyes. The entries broke him. David came home angry again today. "I asked about his day and he snapped at me. I keep wondering when I became an interruption instead of a companion. I saw how he looked at his colleague's wife tonight. with interest, respect. He used to look at me that way. Now he looks through me like I'm glass. His mother called me unfortunate today. David laughed. Sometimes I wonder if he even notices I'm hurting anymore. I'm disappearing. Little pieces of me erode every day until I don't recognize the woman in the mirror. She's quiet when she used to have opinions. She's small when she used to take up space. David did this to me. Or maybe I let him. I don't know which is worse. The entries went on, page after page, documenting her slow erasure while he'd been too busy building his empire to notice. The final entry was dated the night before she left. Tomorrow I'm going to do something terrifying. I'm going to choose myself. I don't know if I'll find the courage when morning comes, but right now, writing this while David sleeps beside me, I know what I have to do. I have to save myself because no one else will. Only the Ruby I used to be can rescue what's left. I hope she's still in there somewhere. David closed the journal, vision blurred with tears. She'd been planning her escape, gathering courage, and he'd been actively cruel, sending her to the guest room, demanding apologies. He pulled out his laptop and read everything Ruby had done since leaving. Every interview, every article, every post about her emerging design career. What struck him wasn't just her success, it was her generosity. Where she could have destroyed him publicly, she chose grace. My former marriage taught me about resilience, she told one interviewer. Sometimes the hardest lessons come from the most painful experiences. I don't regret my past. I learned from it. No names, no accusations. She'd taken the high road while he'd spent months cursing her for leaving, blaming her for his failures. His phone rang. Nora. Have you been drinking? She asked without preamble. What do you want? To tell you that I ran into Ruby at a symposium today. She was giving a talk about sustainable fashion design. The room was packed, David. She's become someone important. I know. Do you? Because you keep acting like she diminished after leaving you. She didn't. She won't. She doesn't need you, and she's better off without you. I know that too. Nora's voice softened. I was cruel to her, David. We all were. I thought I was protecting you, but Ruby wasn't dead weight. She was ballast. Without her, you're adrift. I'm sorry I didn't see that sooner. Everyone's apologizing to me for things they did to Ruby, but I'm the one who should be apologizing. I'm the one who made the cruelty possible. Then apologize. Not to us, to her. She won't take my calls. Then write her a letter. Show up at her studio. Do something? After Nora hung up, David sat with her words weighing on him. Apologize. Such a simple concept, yet so complicated when you'd spent years being too proud to admit fault. He started writing. Letter after letter, trying to capture the magnitude of his regret in words that felt perpetually inadequate. Dear Ruby, I'm sorry for... For what? For everything. For specific cruelties? For the systemic erasure of her identity? He wrote for hours, filling pages with confessions and apologies. When he finally finished, dawn was breaking outside his window. But would truth be enough? Would any apology, however sincere, undo the years of damage? David had no answers. He only had this letter, this moment of clarity that came too late to save what he'd destroyed, but might, maybe, be early enough to save himself from becoming permanently the monster he'd revealed himself to be. He drove to Ruby's studio in the grey morning light. The studio was in a neighborhood he'd once called beneath him, now clearly thriving with local art and small shops. Through the window, he saw Ruby working, her hair pulled back, her face focused on the fabric beneath her hands. She looked peaceful, whole. David stood there watching this woman he'd once claimed to love, seeing her truly for perhaps the first time, and understood the fundamental difference between loving someone and loving what they did for you. He'd loved what Ruby did for him. The support, the stability, the appearance of being a decent man. He'd never loved Ruby herself, the woman with dreams and needs and opinions that sometimes contradicted his own. And she'd figured that out before he had. left before he could, and built herself into someone remarkable while he fell apart. The letter in his hand felt pathetic now, insufficient to bridge the canyon he'd created between them. But he walked into the studio anyway, the bell above the door chiming his arrival. Ruby looked up, saw him, and her expression went carefully neutral. Not angry, not hurt, just blank, which was somehow worse. He'd become someone who merited no emotional response, not even negative ones. "David, Ruby, Can we talk?" "We have nothing to talk about. Our attorneys handle everything now. I wrote you a letter." He held it out like an offering. "I know it doesn't fix anything. I know it's too late. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I did, what I destroyed, who I became." Ruby didn't take the letter. "What do you want from me, David? Forgiveness, closure, some kind of redemption that makes you feel better about yourself?" "I don't know. Maybe I just needed to face you and admit that you were right about everything, that I failed you, that losing you was the consequence of my own cruelty. Okay, you've admitted it. You can go now." Her dismissal hurt more than any anger could have. He'd become irrelevant to her, a chapter she'd closed and moved past. "Ruby, please. Please what? Please let you feel forgiven so you can stop feeling guilty? Please tell you it wasn't that bad, so you can avoid facing what you actually did?" "I won't give you that, David. What you did to me, what you allowed others to do to me, it was that bad. It was worse than bad. It was soul-destroying, and I barely survived it. I know. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't time travel. Sorry doesn't undo years of humiliation and erasure. Sorry is just a word you're using to make yourself feel better." She set down her work, finally meeting his eyes fully. "I've built a life without you. I've remembered who I am, who I was always meant to be. Your apology doesn't change that. It doesn't affect me at all." And there it was, the truth that cut deepest. He'd expected anger, tears, some evidence that he still mattered enough to hurt her. Instead, he was nothing. A footnote. A lesson learned. David nodded slowly, setting the letter on her counter. "I understand. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be happy. I am happy, finally." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, watching you succeed while I fall apart has been the clearest lesson I've ever learned. You never needed me. I always needed you. I just realized it too late." Ruby didn't respond, just returned to her work, and David walked out knowing he'd gotten exactly what he deserved. Nothing. He drove home through streets that felt foreign, past his company building, where his nameplate would soon be replaced, to his empty house that had never been a home. Everything he'd thought mattered, the status, the power, the appearance of success. It was all worthless without someone to share it with. And the person he'd had, the woman who'd loved him when he had nothing, he'd thrown away to chase more of what ultimately meant nothing at all. David sat in his empty house that night, understanding finally that redemption wasn't something Ruby could give him. It was something he'd have to build himself, slowly and painfully, by becoming someone capable of treating people with the dignity he'd denied her. The question wasn't whether Ruby would forgive him. The question was whether he could forgive himself enough to become someone worth forgiving. David finally had everything he'd thought he wanted. Power, status, control, and he'd never felt more powerless, invisible or alone. Chapter 10. The Queen's Terms. Ruby Tyson didn't need a crown to be royalty. She'd forged one from her own strength, and everyone was about to witness it. The gallery space glowed with soft lighting and possibility. Ruby stood in the center watching volunteers arrange chairs, hang banners, test audio equipment. Tonight was the culmination of months of planning. A charity gala for women rebuilding their lives after difficult relationships. She'd called it Phoenix. Rising, because that's what they all were, women who'd burned down versions of themselves that no longer served them. Ruby. "The caterers need approval on the final setup," her assistant called. Ruby moved through the space with confidence that had become second nature. She wore a gown of her own design, midnight blue with silver threading that caught light like stars. She'd spent weeks perfecting it. This wasn't just an event. It was a statement. Proof that victims could become victors, that leaving could lead to thriving. Guests began arriving as sunset painted the sky. Women who'd attended Ruby's workshops came dressed in her designs. Supporters brought donations and encouragement. Local media set up cameras. And somewhere in the crowd, Ruby knew, were people from her former life. David's colleagues who'd watched her humiliation. His family who'd participated in her destruction. Maybe David himself. The program began with testimonials from women who'd rebuilt themselves. Each story was unique but carried the same thread. They'd lost themselves in relationships that demanded their erasure, then found themselves again. Then Ruby took the stage. The room fell silent as she stood at the podium. "My name is Ruby Tyson," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I was someone before I became someone's wife. I lost myself trying to be enough for someone who would never value me. And I almost didn't survive." She talked about silence and erasure, about how love without respect is just control, wearing a prettier name, about the courage required to walk away from security into uncertainty. "Leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," Ruby continued. "I had no money, no plan, nowhere to go, but I had something more valuable. I had reached the point where anything was better than staying. And that clarity saved my life." The audience hung on every word as Ruby shared her journey, from motel rooms to studio apartments to the design, business she'd built from determination. "I'm not here to tell you leaving is easy. It's not. I'm here to tell you it's possible. You are capable of more than survival. You're capable of transformation. But first, you have to believe you're worth transforming for." Applause erupted as Ruby stepped back. Women approached afterward, thanking her, sharing their own stories. Then the crowd parted and David stood there. He'd been standing in the back, listening to every word. His face was different, older, somehow softer. Ruby felt every eye in the room turn toward them, the moment crystallizing. David approached slowly. When he reached her, he did something that stunned the room. He dropped to his knees. "Ruby," he said, his voice breaking, "I destroyed the only real thing I ever had. You were my partner, my foundation, and I treated you like you were disposable. I spent years diminishing you to inflate myself. I let my family tear you apart because it was easier than defending you. I made you feel small because I was terrified of how big you actually were." Tears streamed down his face as the room watched, as cameras captured this moment. As Ruby stood above him, feeling the weight of every cruel word, every cold shoulder, every time he'd chosen everyone else over her. "I don't expect forgiveness," David continued. "I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that losing you taught me more than having you ever did. You were never my burden. You were my salvation, and I threw you away because I was too proud to see it. Please, if you can find any mercy, teach me how to be worthy of the second chance I know I don't deserve." Ruby looked down at this man who'd once held all the power, now powerless before her, and felt a strange mixture of pain and peace. The room held its breath. Ruby took her time responding, letting the silence stretch. When she finally spoke, her voice carried across the hushed space. "David, look at me." He raised his eyes, and she saw genuine remorse there. "You're right about everything," Ruby said softly. "You did destroy what we had. You did make me feel worthless. You did choose everyone else over me repeatedly. Those are facts we both have to live with." David's face crumbled, but Ruby wasn't finished. "But here's what you need to understand. I didn't survive what you did to me just to come back to you. I survived it to discover who I am without you. This woman standing here isn't the girl who married you. She's someone entirely new, someone I built from the ruins." The room leaned forward, listening. "Respect and love are the foundation of any real relationship," Ruby continued. "You forgot that. We both did. I forgot to respect myself enough to demand better. But I remember now. I know my worth now. And I will never let anyone make me forget it again." "I understand," David whispered. "I'll leave you alone." I just needed you to know. I'm not finished. Ruby's interruption silenced him. You asked me to teach you how to be worthy. I can't do that. Only you can. But if you're truly committed to learning, if you've genuinely changed and not just temporarily sorry, then maybe, someday, we can talk about rebuilding something. Not what we had. That's dead. But possibly something new. Hope flickered in David's eyes. But understand this completely, Ruby said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. I am the queen of my own life now. No one will ever make me feel small again. If you want any kind of relationship with me, you earn it. You prove it through consistent action over time. I will. I swear I will. Don't swear to me. Prove it to yourself first. Become someone you can respect. Then maybe we'll talk. Ruby stepped back, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional distance she'd worked so hard to establish. I'm giving you one chance, David. One opportunity to show me you understand that I am not someone who needs saving or controlling. I'm someone who saved herself. If you can accept that, truly accept it, then call me in 6 months. But if this performance tonight is just another manipulation, then walk away now and stay away. David remained on his knees, tears still flowing, but something in his posture shifted. Not defeat, but understanding. 6 months. I'll use them wisely. See that you do. He stood slowly, bowed his head in respect and walked away without looking back. The room erupted in whispers and speculation, but Ruby ignored them all. She'd meant every word. She would give David a chance, not because she owed him one, but because she believed in transformation.
She transformed herself.
Maybe he could too. But if he couldn't, if he remained the man who'd broken her, then she would walk away again without hesitation. Because Ruby Tyson had learned the most valuable lesson, she was enough, all by herself. As guests surrounded her with congratulations and support, as cameras captured her triumph, as the evening continued in celebration, Ruby felt complete, not because David had apologized, not because she'd given him hope, but because she'd stood in her power, set her boundaries, and refused to diminish herself. The girl who'd worked 3 jobs to support someone else's dreams had become a woman who built her own empire. The wife who'd accepted crumbs had become a queen who demanded banquets. The victim who'd nearly disappeared had become a survivor who blazed bright. And everyone in that room learned the same lesson David was finally beginning to understand. A woman who knows her worth is the most powerful force in any kingdom. And Ruby Tyson's kingdom was just beginning.